Good evening. It is 5:30, and we're going to call this work session special meeting number 15 to order. I'd encourage the audience to turn your cell phones to silent or vibrate. Let's all stand to the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Amanda, would you take the roll, please?
Councilmember Strebe.
Here.
Councilmember Dalby.
Here.
Councilmember Myers.
Here.
Councilmember Rowe.
Here.
Councilmember Stevens.
Here.
Mayor Lazio.
Here. Next item is the approval of tonight's agenda. Is there a motion for that? Move the approval of tonight's agenda.
Second.
Thank you.
Councilmember Strebe.
Yes.
Councilmember Dalby.
Yes.
Councilmember Myers.
Yes.
Councilmember Rowe.
Yes.
Councilmember Stevens.
Yes.
Council, I'd like your blessing to change the order of business a little bit tonight. We have two items that are going to be discussed. The first one needs some action, the resolution. So I'd like to go ahead and do that. And then I'd like to have our staff make a presentation, give you a chance as council to ask questions, and then we'll take questions and comments from the audience. So if we could move in that order, I think it would expedite the meeting. So do you want to take care of the first one, Amanda?
Resolution number 121, 2016, approving the amended administrative consent order number 2011 WW 14A1 between the City of Ottumwa and the Iowa Department of Natural Resources and authorizing the mayor to sign. Recommendation, pass and adopt resolution number 121, 2016.
Move the recommendation as presented. Second. Thank you. Larry Seals, Director of Public Works, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. This amended administrative consent order is entered into between the City of Ottumwa and the Iowa Department of Natural Resources for the purpose of amending the required completion dates for Phase 5 and 7 established in the administrative consent order. Ottumwa is approximately 4 years ahead of the schedule on Phase 4 requirements, and Ottumwa has requested that the required completion date for Phase 5 and Phase 7 be switched so it can continue efforts to reduce the I&I for the sanitary sewer in the Phase 5 Richmond project area, and so it can assess the needs of the Richmond pump station. The Iowa Department of Natural Resources agrees to switching the required completion dates for Phase 5 and 7 and considered appropriate. Phase 5 is amended to have the required completion date December 31st, 2019. Phase 7 is amended to have the required completion date of December 31st, 2016. Just as a little background for the newer members to understand, 7 is the lagoon pump station, and early on in the process, because of all the flooding related issues we had and the amount of effort it took to keep the lagoon down during heavy rain events and the combination of adding all of the storm systems from the south side in the body, that's the reason we pushed that ahead, to avoid flooding. The rest of it is all the background information in the staff summary, but that's it in a nutshell. Switch those two.
You have a complete description in your packet. Are there any questions or comments for Larry? Okay. And this is, again, part of our 25-year consent decree, which we're bound by contract and by federal law to honor.
That's correct. Part of the IDNR requirements, EPA requirements, and it is mandatory.
Okay, if we're ready, we'll take the vote.
Councilmember Strebe.
Yes.
Councilmember Dalby.
Yes.
Councilmember Myers.
Yes.
Councilmember Rowe.
Yes.
Councilmember Stevens.
Yes.
Discussion of public versus private sewers within the city limits. Recommendation is to receive a presentation and comments.
Okay, Larry, would like to have some information from you about this. I think it's a very serious issue that we are addressing tonight, so we want to give you the chance to educate the council and the public to what we're dealing with. And we'll have a chance for council questions at the end, and then we'll turn it open to the audience.
Thank you, Mayor. What we did was we added and supplemented some of the original information that we give you as this particular issue developed. We put together a PowerPoint that we just kind of want to walk you through and maybe explain the difference between private and public sewers. First of all, we're just going to give you a little bit of background. You can see under the existing public sewer system that we have about 787,000 linear feet of sanitary sewer, or 149 miles of known gravity sewer system. We have somewhere around 2,893 known sanitary sewer manholes and about 9.5 miles of known force main. And then we have 21 pump stations that we maintain along with a water treatment plant. Under the storm side, it's increasing as we do separation over the last decade, but we have approximately 397,000 linear feet, or 75 miles of known storm sewer, about 742 known storm sewer manholes, and along with about 3,600 known intakes. Our current requirement for the storm system is that we have to clean 25% of the storm each year under the MS4. Under the sanitary side, we are to clean the entire system every 7 years, or approximately 112 linear feet a year. As far as mapping, we've had different questions on how the city has developed its current map. Back in '99, we were under a mandate from DNR to start a study on what we had to do for a CSO and separation within the city of Ottumwa. So early 2000, we had contracted with McClure Engineering on the south side, and they started with basically our paper maps that we incorporated into the electronic system. And then as we did the field investigation, we would map electronically on the paper maps and correct what we had from the original paper maps, which go, back to the turn of the century up to date. So really it's a ever evolving system. The city crews continue to discover unknown sewer features, new features. We correct and add the information pretty much on a daily basis. Private sewer mapping is particularly difficult because after the initial rough mapping, our mapping is largely based on information provided by the city crews who conduct the sewer cleaning and the televising operation. Private sewers are not cleaned or televised, so we don't have the advantage of being able to put a track head on and actually mark them on the ground and then GPS survey them in. That's what we currently do as we go through the public side. We did reach out. One of the questions that one of the council members had was, what would it take to go citywide and map the private side? So we reached out to 3 separate engineering firms that are normally engaged in that type of work. Each firm had the same conclusion, that there was really no way to put a good sound estimate on that process. Each of them did offer that they would put somebody in here on an hourly rate and start researching our records. What that means is they'd have to dig through all of our subdivision records, correlate it with the city clerk, check with the county to see what was recorded in each subdivision to be able to determine when those subdivisions were built, what was the intent? Were they public sewers? Were they put in as private sewers? There's a lot of different scenarios that's happened over the last 100 years, 125 years. So anyway, they estimated somewhere around 200,000 would be a good starting point. They didn't know if they could make it through 25% of the system, 50% of the system, because they've never really done that. Some of our discussions revolved around the difficulty, but once you get back past probably 1940, the records become even more vague. When you get beyond when there was planning and zoning regulations, then it even becomes harder to determine what is in the system. The other question that we had been asked is, what is the sewer rates used for? We kind of put together just real quick, the current base rate is $14.50. And then you have a unit charge. A unit is 748 gallons of water. It's at $4.75 per unit. So if you used 5 units a month, your sewer bill would be $38.25. If you expand out, we have approximately, depending on occupancy of the residential housing, we use 9,600 units So that equates into about 4.4 million. If you add commercial and residential together, we have last year's revenue of 5,487,000. And then high strength flow, which means anything above what's considered domestic strength. We've set ours at about 300 per milligram. Major expenditures, and if you want to go back, we'd have to go to each budget in 610 and 618 and break out all capital items, all revenues, all expenditures. All we did is we wanted to put out for the people that are here and are curious about what is the major expenditures that they're paying for with that sewer fee. To operate our treatment plant, just your annual O&M last year was $2,439,646. Sewer maintenance, which consists of about 5-man crew, that's the ones that run around and try to clean all the storm, all the sanitary, make point repairs. That cost around, last year it was $601,000. That includes equipment and other expenditures. The SRF debt, this doesn't include all of it, but the big projects was about $1,381,000. And then again, there's a lot of capital projects that also come out of that. And this is a real short version. Again, if you want to get in deep, we'd have to go back to the full budget and look at every line item. One of the things we wanted to put together was just a graphic depiction. I think there's a lot of people confused on privates. Every house in town has a certain number of feet that's a private line. It's considered a lateral. That's the terminology used to describe from a house to the main. You can see the picture. It basically just shows from the house to the sewer main. The distinction is, how far is that lateral? We picked out 2 homes. There's one home that has about 55-foot lateral. This is just based on pulling right off of GIS information. Then we pulled another one, private lateral that's just right off of Park Ave. That lateral is 545 feet long to get to the sanitary sewer. So it really depends on a private lateral of where the house is located. For instance, the one that has the really long one used to be on a septic system. Of course, with some of the new regulations coming through the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, when you sell a home, you're going to have to do a check on your sanitary or your septic system to make sure it's still functioning and working. When it's not, usually the option is to connect if you're within a couple hundred feet of a public sewer or put in another septic. Under this one, he wanted to go gravity. He wanted to get to a public system. We also attached just some of the known private collection systems. Some are commercial, some are residential. The first one you can see is just a private home on East Mary. They wanted to be on the public system, but you can see it ends at Schuyler. So they run down, we allowed them to run down the street, connect to that, and then it's really their sewer. We don't maintain it, we don't clean it, we don't locate it, it's theirs. As long as they're in the right of way. That's done some time ago. The other depiction there is leisure living, and you can see that their entire system is a private system. If you were thinking about trying to take those over, or if they come to you and wanted to make a public system out of that, they would have to do the same as many others. You know, they'd have to provide easements. They would have to provide a whole new sewer system that meets our specifications, standards for material types, gasket types, you know, leak test, all the other things that are associated with this, with a public sewer, along with these run directly under the trailers themselves. So you wouldn't ever want to assume anything that goes under buildings. You just increase your liability if there's future failures under a structure and then the structure itself has a failure. We have other samples where people's homes set below the public system. On this particular one, you can see there's a force main. The house that sets on lot 233 sets extremely low compared to the public system. So they have a grinder pump and is pressurized and comes up to our gravity system. The one on the right of this same slide, that's a couple homes that go to a small private pump station, and again, it lifts it up to East Manning. When you look at these pump stations, you know, I think that one was put in a 36-inch concrete pipe, one single pump. If the city owns that, then you have to have the full redundancy. You have to have the alarm system. You have to have the generator system. So it becomes pretty cost prohibitive to run a pump station for, I believe there's 3 homes on that particular pump station. So those are the things that we would have to look at on how that would work. And then we just kind of broke down which one of these we labeled on this page, the previous aerials. And I know this is flying through it fairly fast, but I think that you can come back and ask questions on any of the slides. Again, the next one, for instance, is the regional healthcare. It has around 2,600 linear feet of known private sewer. Again, we don't have that mapped other than what we can see from manholes, different systems from subdivision plats that they've submitted, but the intent has always been for that to be private, and the public, of course, starts down on Pennsylvania. And again, just more examples from a commercial standpoint. When you look at Diversified Develops or the Kmart Plaza, all of those were developed with private systems. And when you look at the Quincy Place side, they even have a pump station down low. Same thing, you'd have to build that for max flow. You'd have to have redundancy, a second pump. Then you'd have to also have backup power and telemetry and communications. So those are just other examples of systems out there. Now, this is one that has been brought to our attention by a homeowner, McCarroll subdivision. That one, the information from the first packet we have, you can see where when council approved that subdivision in 1953, those lines were intended to be private. It was pretty specific. I'm not sure. People's asked me why that is. That is before my time. I don't know what that council, I don't know why they did it that way, but that is the way they did it. Some of the issues you would have, and between that system, within these 2 subdivisions, there's approximately 2,374 linear feet of private sewer. All these numbers are just based off of aerials and estimates and some of the information we have in our records. We don't really know for sure exactly if it was gasketed pipe or how they bedded it or any other details that we have in our construction projects and that we use to assure that we have a sewer system that doesn't act as a filled tile and pull a lot of stormwater or I&I into our system. And that's just a close-up of leisure living. We already hit that on a previous slide. It does show that it has a little over 9,000 feet of sewer system. We have no idea what's in there. We don't know if it's 8-inch, 6-inch, 4-inch, probably a combination thereof. Again, you can see on this close-up where it actually runs under a lot of the trailers and homes. So that's something that you'd definitely want to take a look at and consider. This one we were trying to attempt to show through pictometry. You can see some of the challenges, and I don't know if you can really see that aerial. We did do a smaller version in your packet. You can see we took the pictometry, we laid out the easements based on what information was within our sewer records, and the offset of the sewer lines, again, based on the sewer logs, and tried to show you how they weaved it through. And then since it's been put in, some of the encroachments, that's either small buildings, garages setting relatively close. And of course, you wouldn't know the actual distance until there was an actual field survey after locating the line to determine all of those items. Let's go to the next one. This is looking down from pictometry. You can see in between the garages. Can you use a pointer on that? Can you go down between the garages? Does it let you do that? You basically follow that fence line that's in between these 2 rows of homes, and that sewer runs right down on that one. It would be the east side of the fence. You can see where there's a good chance it's under that first garage. One of the notes we found is it's offset by 7 feet from the fence or property line. So I'm going to guess it would be right at the wall or slightly under that one. Again, you wouldn't know until you did full surveys, field work, and gathered the data. Same way with the second garage and the small buildings. One of the things that you would encounter to convert this to a public system is to move the obstructions. That would include whatever's built over it. You'd have to work out details on that. This is just further up that same line, just trying to give you an indication. You can see some additional small outbuildings that would need to be relocated if this line were to become public. And again, we just wanted to use this because it's a good tool to get a bird's eye view and kind of follow that alignment up between the homes without actually walking the alignment. Back up one. You can see right there where there's quite a bit of development as far as just adjacent to the swimming pool. A lot of landscaping that runs right down the top of that sewer. Same way with the small buildings and outbuildings, and that's fairly standard. What we go to the next one. We put together, this is really the same information that I provided of what would be completed to do a full assessment and evaluation of that sewer. You'd have to go through and review just the routine maintenance and access. How do you actually get to these points? You'd have to look at all the existing easements. Are they sufficient to actually maintain that? Can we get our trucks in, equipment in, if point repairs? And I won't read that. You have those in front of you. But it's pretty intensive. One of the things we were looking at, what are the options? We found out some additional information today from our bonding attorneys of what we can use money for. Public money cannot be used on private sewers. You know, that was one of the questions that was hanging out in limbo until we got that information back. One possible option with that information is the homeowners could create a homeowners association. The association could contract directly with an engineering firm. The city could approve plans and specifications for the sewer construction. And then the city would oversee the construction as far as monitoring. That would still be part of the contract, would be to have quality assurance as part of the contract, and we would do the monitoring just to make sure the correct material was used and the installation was correct. You know, bedding and other details are very important. And then upon completion of the work, the city would accept the sewer. Under that scenario, you know, they would develop the cost, they would do the letting as a homeowners association, and then they'd be responsible for paying for it. And then the city would assume ownership and maintenance. But again, we'd have to, there's a long road to get to there. Some of the other information we put together, and it's really unknown because we don't know exactly what all is on top of the easement. We don't know exactly how many people would be on board. Again, that would be something that would have to be created homeowners' responsibility as far as an association. It's not unreasonable to say that the estimate could be north of $350,000. You don't know until you have all the appraisals. If everybody come on board, donated the necessary additional easement, because you would also need temporary construction easements. You'd have to move your fences. It depends how it was put together. Is each homeowner responsible to remove plantings and buildings? Is it all in the contract? So that gets complicated. I guess with that, again, I just want to point out that we did confirm, the finance director confirmed with all our bonding attorneys that public money cannot be used on that system. And I would open the floor up to questions.
Okay, before we do that, I want to make a comment that this packet was just given to the council this afternoon, and if there are people that would like a copy, we'll make sure that this is available to the public and make additional copies for people who are interested.
One of the things that we've been taking calls for probably, I don't know if it's 20 days now, We have a list of approximately 25 people. One of the things that we wanted was to gather all the information up before we started send it out in piecemeal. Now that we've got, the questions from a legal standpoint answered, our plan is to turn around and send out the base packet to everyone. I don't know if they need the aerials of all of the other sewers, but we was going to give the people that are directly affected for this line. Hey, can you go back? I do want to point out a couple things. Do you have another? On this one, I'll be off mic. Some of these, and when we put the information together to send out to the homeowner, when they're located through here, it kind of depends when the house was built. Again, we're not really a full research division, but they could either be connected back here or forward. There's a couple small areas where they could already be on a public sewer. It just depends when it was built, because this line was extended later after this system was put in. This used to be the end of the public system, and then as the city grew north, then this stuff was extended. Same way through here, these 4 homes, they could connect either direction. These homes should connect directly here. We really have no way of knowing if they went forward or back when they connected. I mean, that's something the homeowner is going to have to look at. There are a few firms that have a camera with a track head. They could probably also look at how the system goes out of the house. They can look and see if it goes out back or does it go out the front wall. That's a pretty good determination.
So, excuse me. Okay, we're ready for questions. Before we do that, there are a couple of things we should properly acknowledge. Last council meeting, I did receive from Jody Williams a series of, I think it was 144 names that were filed, and by code, and again, this is a city code before any of us were involved, but that does not meet the requirements for an actual petition. But we wanted to acknowledge it. We have received it, and we do have names and phone numbers. And we'll certainly make the packet available to anybody that's on the list. Okay, Bob?
Okay, yeah, Larry, thank you. I think that PowerPoint really does give quite a bit of clarification to the issue. One question though, as you closed and you were talking about the potential of the homeowners association or whatever, maybe working together to develop this. The example you gave very early, private sewer lateral that was 55 linear feet long, and then you mentioned the other one, the extreme, which was 545 linear. And I guess I just want some verification. When that person asked to have that lateral or it put in and connected to our main, they did go through and do all the things that you've suggested, and so it was inspected and so forth before we ever accepted hooking it up.
Well, yeah, what they looked at originally, they had got several different contracts from different firms in town. One of them that had specialized in grinder pumps and pressure mains was going to run down Park Ave itself and connect into the sewer that's down at the other intersection. Ultimately, they looked at the price and maintenance over time, and they decided to go through the backyard. As far as ours, the building department would have inspected the lateral to make sure it had sufficient fall per foot, and then we would inspect everything within the right-of-way and how they tied into the manhole. It was a fairly clever connection. They bored to the manhole to prevent having to cut the street, but, they found the contractor that could do that.
Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation, Larry. That was great. So just to clarify what you had said towards the end, say you can't use public funds for private sewers, correct?
That's correct.
So just to take this one step further, is it legal to just accept public or private sewers as public property?
I don't think that I don't think, if it had been built to a city standard, then that would be a possibility. You would still go back and look at all the encroachments. From a legal standpoint, I'd want to have to run that through the legal department and ask that question. You still don't want to accept something that you cannot maintain. You don't want to accept a sewer that has substandard material or, poor construction techniques to where you have a lot of open joints and you have a lot of inflow. You definitely don't want buildings on top of it.
So, in using your numbers, and just for sake of argument here, that was a legal thing to do. We would have to, and we decided, for example, we were going to take this McCarroll subdivision sewer and make it public property. To get it up to where it needs to be by regulation, we'd still have to spend this $392,000 roughly, correct?
Probably. You'd have to go through and look at the condition of the pipe. I'm going to guess that it would need it replaced completely. It's a 1950. It was actually one of them was built in 49 and then accepted in 53. So I'm not exactly sure how that transpired, but I'm going to guess it's just bell clay tile.
Okay. And I have a question for Mr. J, if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be great on the finance side.
Good evening.
Good evening.
If memory serves me correctly, the budget surplus going into next year was roughly $15,000-$20,000. Is that correct?
I would have to look at it. I haven't looked at that.
I think that's about right.
Mr. Mayor, what that was from the first pass we took at the 17-18 fiscal year.
Yeah, I think actually
General
we
fund.
came out and real close to being
Okay. Well, then,
even going in, even going out.
okay. So even $20,000 is
something like
really
that.
kind of insignificant. So the cost of just this McCarroll subdivision being around $392,000. In looking through the budget for FY 2017, it looks like our health department compensation is around $405,000. Our sewer capital for the year is about $440,000. So in doing this, we would essentially, since we don't have any funds available, if we made this just public sewer, just to get this up to par, we would essentially have to completely wipe out the sewer capital for the year. Is that a fair statement?
That would be a fair statement, but probably I would recommend that we'd have to go out and bond for it. Would be because the capital that the individuals have, if we had accepted it, we'd have to have ownership of it. And I assume that's the position you're taking, that we would accept it and then we'd have to bring it up to.
Right. But either way, you're socializing the cost of this one subdivision across the entire community and strapping them down for this $392,000 for just this one project.
Correct. You would have to do that because the capital items that are in both the water pollution control and the sewer maintenance are items that have been over a period of years projected out as to needing to be done at this point in time in the history of the what's been based on what's been previously budgeted and what's been accomplished. So yes, we would have to find some alternative source of funding.
Okay. But even at that, since we're running such a tight budget right now, the debt service on that would still put us in the hole in future years.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I would not recommend it. So,
Mr. Mayor, can I just speak to Councilman Rowe's comments? And that goes back to whether or not a system, an enterprise system such as this would be conveyed. As you know, you can quit claim property, which has really no ownership interest in it. I've called a couple of cities this past week, and I spoke with the city of Spencer today, Iowa, and we talked about that at some length, myself and also their public works director, that a system, any unknown, as Larry pointed out in his presentation, enterprise system like that, the city wouldn't simply accept that. So I think we need to just get the cadence correctly here, and that is there'd have to be some sort of evaluation assertion made before the city would even think of it.
Right, which would ultimately drive this number up even further.
Should the city decide, yes, it would morph.
Which would where I'm going with this is it would financially strap the rest of the community even further than what the community is right now with our current budget. That's kind of what I'm getting at, and that's just one small subdivision, Ottumwa.
that's it exactly.
I think there needs to be some clarification too, because I know a couple of property owners submitted real estate appraisal forms, and often those are checked city sewers. And I personally went over and talked to the county recorder and the county assessor, And it's my opinion that unless somebody has checked their deed, you don't necessarily know that that's a public or a private sewer unless you see that on your plat map, because anybody can check public sewer just because it's in the city limits. But it's not, in fact, a public sewer. We have 17 different examples here where they're located in the city, but they are not, in fact, public sewers. And I think I also checked with Joni Keith, our attorney, and this uniform residential appraisal form, I asked both the assessor and the auditor if people come in and check this. They said, no, this is often done by the real estate firm, and nobody had been in the last year to check them. Then we also have a new form that came out by the DNR in 2012, real estate transfer for groundwater hazard statements, which is very detailed, and a homeowner has to sign that under the penalty of law for declaring whether or not this is a public sewer disposal, water underground storage, hazardous waste. So there's a general misconception about the fact that just because I bought a home, it may or may not be on a public sewer.
Well, one point that you really made was it is public sewer when it gets here.
When it gets there.
You know, you'd have either a septic system, have a leach field, and some sort of outlet, or ultimately it goes in. I guess the question becomes, how long is it as a private system before it hits the public system?
Your Honor, I think on the real estate listing agreement, I think we got people in here that used to deal in real estate pretty heavily, and I think it simply says private or septic tank. When I dealt in real estate, that's, public or septic tank, excuse me. So it really doesn't define it as being private sewer system and then eventually hooks into a public system. It just tells you, well, it's not on a septic tank. And believe it or not, we have numerous septic tanks within the city of Ottumwa, but that's neither here nor there. But I think that's the intent, either public or private.
Skip, if I may though, I just read ours from 2 years ago as a seller, and it simply says you can check the box for sewer. Does not say,
Got one right here if you want to look at it.
or you can check the box for septic, but it doesn't specify public or private, either one.
I know it does not.
Okay.
But then,
Yeah.
yes, you're right. That's the way it is.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Dalby.
Yeah, I was just to simplify all this stuff, basically what I've been able to gather, and I'm not too sharp, not the sharpest crayon in the box, but when it comes down to it, basically what we're all saying is it's buyer beware on all of this as far as the disclosure form, because basically what we have here, and this is what I'm interpreting this, and this is my opinion as a homeowner, basically what you have here is a city sewer, because 90% or 95% of it is a city sewer. It definitely dumps eventually into a city system. We have a small area here, so many foot, that is private. And for whatever reason, back in the day, whether it's lack of inspections, greed of the developer, I mean, let's call it what it is, that was put in and done. That's in the past. And we can't go back and apparently do that over again, because right now it seems like no one's responsible, but everybody's guilty. And that's a tragedy, because I don't think we're going to come to a resolution really on this. And really, it's kind of confusing, because I really don't know where to go. At one point through this whole beginning of this, it's easy to say, well, somebody's got to be responsible. I mean, as a homeowner, I'd want to know what in the world I was buying. And so we can say, well, the realtor is responsible, or the abstract, the person that writes and updates the abstract's responsible, or the city's responsible. They put, they should have put it in or accepted it as private and then went to public, or the developer should have been responsible. He's not around anymore. And, we named a street after him and a lot of other stuff. But we can't go back and overturn history. That's simply what it is. So from what I'm gathering is no one is responsible at this point. So I guess we got to move forward with that. But just to clarify one thing, our policy going forward with residential private sewers, do we allow that to go on anymore? For residential private sewers? If a developer came to you and said, I want to develop this area and I want to put in a sewer for residential development, and I want to put in a private sewer, and all the homeowners would agree to this. I mean, how would we go forward and make this better so it'd be better documented? We wouldn't lose track of this 25 years and 10 homeowners later until we're sitting right back here doing this same thing again.
Well, I think a lot of the technology is improved when we do our subdivision review and plats. We're going to make sure, and it's all evolved over time. I mean, there's even been a lot of evolution since the 80s as far as stormwater, drainage, easements, things to prevent what we're dealing with today. It worked then, it has worked until now. How do you solve it once it becomes a problem? So all of our review process, and I'd have to get into the code to make sure with this newest code edition, from our standpoint, you'd want a public system. Now, we have had commercial properties that come in in recent years that wanted to maintain a private street. They wanted to be able to gate it. Well, it's not a public street then. If you want to do your development, we're not going to maintain it. We're not going to snow plow it. If that's what you want, okay, in order to get you to develop. And it has private sewer on it. So I'm not sure we would turn away a developer if they want to, but I think that now we would make sure that there was covenants and there would be something attached directly to the deed. That's where it should have been, is in the original deed and recorded for anybody that bought it or anybody that done an abstract background check and had that done through the, abstractor. That would have been noted and they would have known it up front.
So covenants and that type of thing we would be able to track that a heck of a lot better now than we would have back in 1950.
Well, I think that you have to
Inspections,
tie
that
it
type of
during
thing.
development agreement actually done.
Right, and with our new planning ordinance, and come back to that, we have a lot better handle on that. That's obvious. So
I mean, it's the same way when we do projects now, we make sure they're recorded, filed. We make sure that they're actually followed through. I mean, we can see holes in the process over the years. And again, it's as you said, you can't really go back and point your finger in 1950. I'm not even sure who was here.
right, okay, thank you.
Any other questions from council? Any other comments?
I got one.
Yep, go ahead.
Who enforces covenants in a subdivision?
Well, that's another issue on just a covenant. If you put that it's a private sewer, and now you're starting to get out of my realm, we'd have to get the planners up here. I know that some of them that I've been involved with, they had time limits on them, and if you didn't renew them, then they're gone. If you get into specific covenants, then you're going to have to talk to probably planning. And that goes to homeowners associations, I believe. But what happens in 20 years? Good question.
Okay, maybe that's something that, I don't want to blindside Joni, but maybe that's something that could be answered later. But it was always my understanding that the people within the subdivision were responsible for enforcing those covenants. And I know from working here for a long period of time, we got into situations in the east end of the community where there were covenants in there that as the homes were built, sidewalks were supposed to be put in.
Correct.
I'm kind of getting off base here a little bit, but all of a sudden, there was no sidewalks. So we had to go back out there and say, hey, you didn't follow instructions. And we made a lot of people upset at that time. But that's the reason that I asked the question, who enforces the covenants? And in the homeowners association, they should make sure that garages, and fences, and shrubs are not planted on top of a sewer line, even though it is private or public, whichever it may be. So there's a lot of things here that didn't happen throughout the years. I don't know who you blame. You can't blame any one particular group, or the city. Thank you.
Have we looked at cities of comparable sizes, and are they in a similar situation here? Are there any cities that have all public sewers, or is this a similar situation that exists in other comparable cities?
Andy's had the most contact on this. I've had a little bit through our association, but it seems to be common.
To that point, Councilman Strebe raises a good question. I've certainly never heard of a city would in fact, maintain a private system. I called 9 different cities, and the cities that answered when I asked the question, do you maintain private sewers? Marshalltown, Oskaloosa, Pella, Centerville all said no. Burlington, Clinton, Mason City, Mount Pleasant, and Spencer all gave the same answer, and that was if it was brought up to code at the expense of the homeowners or homeowners association or something, then after inspection, and I know in Spencer they indicated that they would have some supervision over the installation, then they would accept it.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions from council? I think, Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, just not to go back into the weeds again here, but okay, moving forward, and maybe we're not ready to do that yet, but I have a question that goes toward the future here. Jody, for instance, and some of the other neighbors, and frankly, all the other ones that are on public lines, this was done back 50 years ago. So let's just assume they're all starting to get aged and they're going to start failing or backing up or getting infiltrated with roots and other things. So going forward, what are we going to do now, or what are the homeowners going to do now with their private lines? This is going to become fairly common when we have this kind of stuff because they're aging. So say tomorrow, Jody's neighbor on up the line or down the line has a backup. And, what do we tell these people that have private lines knowing that they're aging infrastructure? Do we just say, hey, have at it, boys? I mean, or do we say, here's a plan that you can follow? Do we initiate the process? We've already established we can't spend public money on private sewers. We know that there's a plan in place that possibly they could take over through a buy-in and bring it up to code or whatever. But what do we tell them to do now? Find another, dig a hole? I mean, what do we do?
Mr. Mayor, let me, if I might just comment on that a little bit. This somewhat goes back to some of the cities I contacted. And Spencer is an example of one of the cities I contacted, help any way, shape, or form at all with people that are on private sewers. The inspection, the camera, as Larry indicated, camera, and you don't do that. None of those cities do that. They don't. Another item to point out, and I know there's some discussion, why doesn't the city have a map that specifically says these are the specific public sewers, specific private sewers? When private sewers were put in, and they may probably still put in today, but the lion's share of these, Larry, correct me if I'm mistaken, you probably go back 50, 60 years or longer. When these private sewers are put in, the developers commonly don't come down to City Hall and say, hey, I just want to let you know I put in a private sewer. They don't put that in. And what happens when you begin to have backup on the line, then our crew finds out, oh, that's a private sewer. That's not something that we maintain. Now, there have been some instances, quite frankly, to clear a pipe where I would imagine, I know in the city I came from, we would, try and clear the line, but that's not something that we would commonly do. But I just want to emphasize that. It is impossible for any city to put together a map and say, I specifically know these are public, these are private, and the lion's share of them are going to be unknown. And Larry, I don't want you to put you on the spot, but an example you could give, I would imagine if you're like most cities I've been in, a lot of the private sewers, you stumble across those when the crew are out there digging them up, and you don't know whether it's going to be public or private when you're digging them.
That's exactly right. I mean, on multiple occasions, we're putting a main line in, and all of a sudden we'll find a parallel line. And I understand why they did it. It might be an existing home already connected in the middle of the street. Maybe it's deep. Maybe it's 13 feet deep. So they'll tee into that line, and they might run down under the sidewalk in the parking. They'll pick up 2 more homes because they don't want the expense of dropping into public sewer within the street, because it is expensive. If you don't stub out as the sewer is going in and get some sort of riser up, because typically, when they're not developed, they'll put in a T at the low corner of your lot or a Y, and that's it.
Your Honor, can I ask one more question?
Sure.
I mean, I don't know how much, maybe I'm not understanding this, but okay, put myself in the position of a person on a private line whose sewer is aging. Can we not offer a suggestion on what they might do if their sewer collapses tomorrow? Say it falls in. Can we say, you got to call a person to come and reconstruct your sewer. If nothing else, can we say that's the avenue you need to take?
Well,
That's my
I
question.
think that we're kind
What do
of
they do?
pinned in. I think that's exactly what
Okay.
they do.
That's all I wanted to know.
You know, I think that as a subdivision, they will probably have to look in and form that,
Okay.
you know, because that is the problem.
Hire a private contractor and get it fixed. Okay. That's all I was asking. All right, thank you.
Do we have any homeowners associations within the city limits of Ottumwa currently that you know of?
Yeah, I'd want to check. I was thinking Weaver Edition had some sort of, maybe they're just covenants, not a homeowners association, but just covenants within the division.
Okay.
Comfortable at this point? Okay, then I would ask you to step aside for a moment, Larry, and let's, if there's anyone in the audience that wants to raise a question or make a comment, please come to the microphone and give your name and your address, and we'll give you a few minutes to do that. I want to keep this orderly, and again, this is a serious issue. We've got to get the facts out. Okay. Amanda is giving me a note here that we'll have a presentation or a copy of the presentation tonight at the end, so we'll have you sign up. We'll send it to you. So everybody gets whatever. So if there's somebody that wants to come up, I saw one hand step up, please, and tell us who you are, and I'll set the timer.
Good evening. My name is Jody Williams, and I live at 2619 Clearview Street. You can see my house in the lower left-hand corner of the map up there. Good evening, Mayor, City Administrator, City Council. I appreciate the opportunity to come and listen and learn more about the private sewer lines in our community with this public meeting. Homeowners in the last few weeks have been shocked, as I have, to learn that their homes are served by private sewer lines. While we know our neighborhood is affected, there may be more, and I tried to write down as many as I could from that slide, so I'm glad I'm going to get to a copy of that presentation, because that is information that I would like you to share. What other neighborhoods or subdivisions are also served by private sewer lines, and then how will that information be shared with homeowners? Other questions I have, and they mirror some that came from the council this evening: who is responsible for the repair and maintenance of private sewer lines? How will the sewer separation process be handled when it comes to our neighborhood? And how will realtors, banks, appraisers, insurance companies, and even the Wapello County assessors resolve the discrepancies on documents of homes now and in the future? One might assert that the sewer in our neighborhood could already be considered a public or city sewer due to how it's been serving the public for all of these years. Add that in 1950, the city requested and was granted permission by the McCarrolls to hook newly installed city sewer lines to the already in place sanitary sewer that is now being considered private sewers. I too am concerned about the city's image. At that same time, we need to be able to peel back the flower beds and know that infrastructure exists that provides comfort and security to our residents. Infrastructure that includes sewer lines and roads. I trust that you'll do the right thing and make all sewer lines in our city public sewer lines operated and maintained by the city. Councilman Rowe talked about this being socialized across the community, but right now our taxes, our property taxes and our sewer fees are being used to subsidize the maintenance and repair of all the other sewer lines in our community. I respectfully submit an updated version of the online petition. There are additional names, and so here's a copy. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody.
Who would you like?
Amanda. Right.
Is there anyone else? I thought I saw another hand. Come on up and give us your name and make whatever comments.
Thank you. Excuse me. I'm Martha Dietz. I live at 2609 Clearview, next door to Jody. The sewer line runs down my driveway, and apparently we both hook into it. And what I'm wondering is, if this sewer system is that old and is probably close to needing repairs, serious repairs, what would keep us from putting in septic systems if the DNR approved them. So,
Mayor, it's my understanding that city code states that if you're within 200 feet, if your property is within 200 feet of a public sewer, you have to go to it. You can't put a septic system in.
Skip, if I could
State law.
correct you on that, it's actually state code, it's
State
not
code.
city code.
Okay, let's take one at a time. Larry, you have a comment?
Mark covered it, it's
State
state
code.
code.
Okay.
so the city has no code on it.
Well, we can't override city code or state code.
Yeah, it overrides.
So if you're further than 200 feet, then you would be eligible to put in a septic system.
That's my
correct.
understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kathy Courtney. I live at 20 Kenwood. And we've lived there since 1987. And up until 4 weeks ago, we thought we were private or public sewer because of all the documentations that we've been given. Since that time, I have contacted my insurance agent to see how the public sewer insurance would help me out in case I needed to use that. And that was another question. If I purchased the city's public sewer insurance, would that help cover that? When I talked to my provider, and I said, I don't think it will, but no one really knew the answer. He said that there's no one out there that sells sewer insurance to us. So there we would be, maybe not be able to use the public sewer insurance, but yet we couldn't purchase private sewer insurance either.
If you're referring to the insurance that's offered by the waterworks, that is not through the city, that is through the waterworks. And that is a firm out of Des Moines that has been using that insurance company for some time. You might want to take that up with Mike Heffernan at the waterworks. I mean, that is, we appoint the members to that board, but they are an independent board and not under city jurisdiction.
Mr. I would point out, though, to your point, though, it is very, very common, public or private system, to have insurance companies that want to come in and provide that type of coverage. But again, that's something will certainly help with your contacts with the hydro plant, but that's something that's quite common, actually.
Your Honor, if I have a question, I'm confused now. I had a neighbor come to me the other day and said they were insurance on their water lines, and then there was a separate insurance company on their sewer.
That's
They're
correct.
lateral from their house to their main.
Same company.
It's the same company. Okay,
Same
and that
company.
insurance is only tied to your lateral, and that's from the house to the main. Okay, so that wouldn't be involved with the main we're talking about here, but that would be your lateral that you covered here. Just point of clarification there, just to. So that wouldn't affect what we're talking about on the private main, but that would take care of your lateral. Is that correct, Larry? Is that?
I haven't really reviewed that insurance. I mean, I do understand that it was a company that approached Waterworks more of a building.
They're still offering the sewer though too also? They're offering that, the waterworks?
Yes.
Yes, but it's
Okay.
more, they're the billing agent as
Apparently we're all
far as
confused
getting
here.
the information out. It's not their insurance program. It's somebody that approached them.
But the city is not
Can you
offering any
distribute-
of that stuff, correct? That's,
Mr. Mayor, another point to Councilman Dalby's point, that,
that
again, this is almost like a third-party contractor as far as, I know with the city I came from, Missouri, the thing, we would have insurance companies come in and they would provide insurance, again, on the lateral. And what they would do with the insurance as well is they would determine, is this our fault or is it the city's fault? Because we had that same policy my wife and I did, and it turns out that it was our fault. And the insurance company reimbursed, I'm not going to get into the insurance business. Quite frankly, on the lateral, that's what they're covering, and they will help make a determination as to whether or not they're going to pay a claim based on who's at fault.
Okay, so then I have a couple of other things. One thing that I wanted to bring up is, how is this going to affect the resale of my home? When we purchased our house, we thought it was public. Now, if I have to check, or now that it's a known fact that we are private, it's going to affect our property value. And so that's a big concern. Another concern is, I'm losing my train of thought here, but there's just a lot of things that it's not, you guys did not create this mess, but I guess I'll just end was saying you could do the right thing by just making all sewers in Ottumwa public.
Okay, there was someone else that stood up.
John Klosterman, I live at 2646 Clearview. And Andy, I talked to you last week about presentation as to help resolve this. Did not see that up there. Did you discuss that with anybody else?
Oh, this presentation, the day that you walked in?
Yeah.
Well, this presentation wasn't done.
No, but I asked you about being our sewers private. If the city would go and inspect it.
That's right. You did ask that question. You recall from that conversation.
Yeah.
I told you that that's the legislative council would need to make.
And I understand that,
Right.
but did you present it to any of these gentlemen since that time to this meeting?
No, because that's something I've got to be careful that I need to make sure they all hear it all at once, and I'm not talking to individual council members.
I'll let you take care of that. I trust you all. I'd like confirmation when that's done, please. Couple of questions is, Larry brought it up that a lot of these sewers have to meet codes and different things like that. So if the code is changed every year, every 5 years, does the city have to go and change everything that's previously built? Because these were built back in the 50s. And I'm assuming, we're assuming, you know what that means? That at the time, the contractor, hopefully the guy that put the subdivision in, had somebody put it in that was reputable. We don't know that unless you know that, Larry.
No, I wasn't around.
Well, I'm assuming that the guy did. I'm just saying if you didn't know that,
reasonable
research or
assumption.
not. So wouldn't that be grandfathered in? Because all the other sewer lines down in the main part of town as it grew out, every 5 years or so, did you have to go back in and replace all them? You understand what I'm asking?
Let me, Mr. Ray, if I can, let me see if I can, let's walk backward and forward into your comments and suggestions. And that is whether the code changes over a given period of time. The city's code does, as you've seen in the council meetings, it's very, very common.
Yeah.
But again, as you and I talked about, when someone puts in a private sewer, sometimes the people in the engineering office know it. Oftentimes they do not. So the maps that any city would have are somewhat of an imperfect science. What you and I spent some time talking about, you asked me the question, would there be the possibility then of the city assuming responsibility for private sewers if they were then brought up to code? And then remember, you and I had a discussion about whether, the inspection part and the camera and that kind of thing. And I told you on the inspection part and the camera, that would be a legislative decision that I can't make. I did tell you that, and you recall, and you remember this, I did tell you, staff has shared with council the concept, the idea of assuming responsibility if the private sewers are brought up to code. If they're brought up to code. Now, based on some of the cities I've spoke with, like with Pella, it didn't sound like they do that. But I said that's a discussion that staff needs to convey with council and see if they're comfortable with that. Again, going back on the fact, you assume responsibility after it has been inspected and meets, quite frankly, criteria, just like Spencer I was doing.
So I just want to know if you talked at all to any of these gentlemen.
Sure.
Or not, and bring it up, because in talking, as I remember, you were pretty, I don't say excited, but positive that might be an avenue to go down.
I think it's a viable option.
But it wasn't presented. I know you didn't present it to these guys or have a chance to, but I mean.
Well, and I don't interrupt you, but one of the problems we're having, and this is something the public doesn't, I don't think, understand fully, is that you can no longer talk with a group of council people if you don't do it in a public setting. And that's because of a recent Supreme Court decision here in Iowa that affected the supervisors in Indianola.
Yeah.
And we get into all kinds of, our hands are tied sometimes because Andy could talk to me, and that might be construed as he's trying to get a decision made. And I don't even get to vote. So there are some things that are really complicating this subject. So this is the first time we as a council, that's why we felt we needed to have a public work session with this documentation to understand, first of all, the length of this and what's going on and how this would affect financing for the entire city. Because I think as Larry's outlined, and you'll see if you get a packet, there are 16 or 17 examples in your packet that we're not just talking about the McCarroll addition. So we have to make a prudent decision for the future of this community with, sewer rates they're already high, I think, personally.
They are.
So, we have to take that into account. Larry, were you going to make an additional comment?
Well, that's kind of a bigger subject. He had went to what were the specifications as when the line was put in the 50s. Their I&I requirement wasn't really.
What is
there.
I&I for the audience, please?
Inflow and infiltration. Okay. The difference is, even if you had a high peaking factor, like if you have a new system, you might have, whatever the homes load into it, that's it. And then over time, it might get up to 8-to-1, meaning if you use round numbers, if it normally flows 100 gallons, during a rain event, it might hit 800 gallons. Those are very low numbers. But back then, CSOs were allowed. You could dump directly into the river under high flow because the thought at the time was, and this is an old worn out cliche, but, the solution to pollution was dilution. So they just dump it in the river while the river was under high flow. Well, now you got to go back and you look at these little contributory systems into your main system, and we do have problems in that system. The Grandview pump station is already peaked out and at times have discharges. I mean, in the next few years, we'll be in that area looking at I&I. What that means is we're going to look at, is there footing drains connected into these sanitary systems? Is there sump pumps? Is there roof leaders? And that was part of our study when we come through and we looked at and we smoked the systems to see, do you have smoke coming out your vent? Does it come out your drains? That'll be a next phase. It's a complicated project. I want to go back to your funding a little bit. When we look at funding on the sanitary side, because it is very expensive, we projected out our pro forma. We actually did 30 years when we started this project, but then the actual compliance schedule is 25. Any of these major projects you incorporate into that pro forma before you can base your rates to support that. You got to have bond coverage and a few other things that, Bob could go into the details on that. So I just wanted to kind of touch back and bring that up. It's not like we have a pool of money just sitting there. We try to project our rate increases are projected on what we need. We look at them frequently based on the number of grants that we've been able to get into the community to kind of basically slow down the rates. I know it's easy to get lost in time, but at one point we were looking at sewer rates as high as $128,000 or $128 a month. If we had to fund everything from sewer rates only. And that's not really a scare tactic. It's just the world we live in.
Your Honor, a quick comment to this gentleman here. I know where you're getting at with your comment here and your questions. What's nice about, however, open meetings law, what's nice about it is the fact that we can get out in a public open meeting and have this kind of dialogue and conversation. In years past, we haven't been able to do that. However, one thing it doesn't cover is the fact that as council, we can go to staff members and ask questions. And believe me, after this issue has come up, this has generated a lot of questions by council and our staff. And thanks to our new city administrator, has made it very clear that we're open to be able to address staff and ask questions and get information. He's made it very open for us to do that. And so we have seen kind of this coming, moving in that direction of public sewers and looking at costs associated with doing some of that. The problem I know a lot of council members have had, at least myself have had, is when you do it for one, you do it for the entire city. And Jody, you made that comment of taking over the entire city's private sewer lines. However, that's going to come at a huge cost. And one we're looking at and already with one subdivision is going to be a tremendous amount of money. So those questions have been asked, and it was one of the first that several of us have asked. But we got a good staff here that's on it, and they're working the numbers. And as far as that goes, we'll do the best job we can with the best information possible.
Mr. Mayor, if I go, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, John.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. A question that I asked you and I didn't get a full answer, and I don't know, is there going to be a sewer separation up on the north side as in the McCarroll division?
Right.
Larry, you want to respond to that, please?
In this area, all the McCarroll subdivisions 1 through I think there's 5 or 6. You actually have a separate storm system. If you look down at the bottom of the swell where the sanitary crosses, there's actually a storm line that also crosses through there and goes daylight into a ditch. That's already separated.
So who paid for that? Who put that in?
That would have been done during the subdivision development.
So did anybody have to approve that?
It would have been all part of the original construction.
And again, I think,
That was my question.
well, I don't know that we had stormwater separation that far back. The Clean Water Act took place in 74. So, the division was built in the 49, 50, 53, 55. So that would have preceded all of the regulation that we are now responsible for. And if you've been reading the Des Moines Register, you certainly know that water quality and water quantity are really becoming public issues. Flint, Michigan is to cite one in quality, but the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico and so forth down in Louisiana, there are things that just didn't exist back then that we're now being held accountable for.
So, Mayor, I have a couple.
Certainly, go ahead.
Well, is the gentleman's time up, or am I?
Yes, I think we've given him
Okay.
adequate time. Thank you, John, and I appreciate you came in and talked directly to Andy.
And I was wanting to respond a little bit to John's thought. I thought in a broad way, we have indirectly answered his question, because I think part of the proposal that I heard anyway and have read was that if they were brought up to code, and those ifs had to be under the homeowner's expense. So to me, we have indirectly answered that, I suppose. But then my second one, Larry, I keep getting, and I'm not sure, but myself as a property owner, from our house out to the main is a private line, correct?
Correct.
And every property there or in the city that then is also called a private line, it does connect somewhere to a city main, which is why they pay sewage fees, correct?
Right. Ultimately, where I pointed back in and we did the color for you could distinguish the difference, you can see where it connects into that manhole. It still has to make it all the way across town through multiple pump stations. It still has to go back to water treatment and be treated. You've seen the major expenses that we put forth. The lion's share is the O&M of the treatment plant.
I just wanted to be clear on that all of us have private lines.
Well, one of the things, again, and this is new information, and one of the reasons we didn't want to just start shooting out parcel information, we were waiting to get some of our legal confirmations back. And again, when Bob received that from our bonding attorneys, it pretty much ties our hands as far as spending public money on that system. There's some legalities that come in regardless. I mean, I don't like people to call me and I don't have an answer for them. I had a couple of these people that live in this area call me and their statement was, well, what can we do? And I really didn't have an answer for them, and I know it didn't settle well with them, but I really can't answer what I can't answer. I mean, I don't have a good solution for them. And it's very unfortunate. Our office typically tries to solve problems, but at some point we can't.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other council comments or questions?
Real quick, Your Honor, and I know
Sure.
time's getting late. This is pretty good practice, seeing as we're going to have maybe hopefully some open town hall meetings coming up. This is good dialogue we've been having. It's good practice. Larry, on sewer separation, one quick thing, and I don't totally understand this either. Since we don't initiate total sewer separation in certain neighborhoods, we don't go in and tear all the streets out. And some of that already been done just by chance in certain areas. It's not been purposely separated, but it's easier because some of it's
No, actually,
how does that all work?
This was late enough in construction that, it was specific in the council action that they could not direct, and that is one of the things that I believe made it into the deed, that they couldn't direct surface water into the sanitary. There was a restriction on it. So this
Back
storm.
then?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I don't remember if that started, Mayor, I think it was in the late 40s, 47 or something like that, when they started actually realizing that you don't want combined systems, but I'd have to go back and.
They started way back then. They started thinking about that.
Sure.
That's interesting.
Well, I mean, I think they seen the writing on the wall, but eventually just the sheer volumes of water that you're handling.
Interesting. Thank you. I appreciate the
Mark?
presentation.
Okay. I absolutely empathize with a flooding of a basement. I had it happen in one of my houses, and I had to completely gut the basement because of it. It was terrible. Unfortunately, I had to pay for that because it was a private sewer backup that I had. But looking at the numbers here, and I'm sorry, I'm a mathematician. That's what I do. Looking at these numbers, and you mentioned at a minimum 17 subdivisions that have this.
Well, just systems that we identified. I mean, when we first started this exercise, it was like, well, how many do we have? I mean, everybody in the office knew that, oh, there's some over here, some of our maintenance crew. And actually the Mylars is marked, these in particular are marked as private. These are the ones where, and in the past, we did have a few calls. They would call and say, what is this? It's on a private line. We don't really seem to receive them in the last 10 or 12 years, but we used to receive a few.
Okay. Well, I guess where I was going with that is, if we have, and it's just simple math here, but I want to take this out a little bit, because I think that the folks in Ottumwa sometimes get dirty information. So I just kind of want to take this out a little bit, because I think that it needs to be drawn out to the point of minutia here, so everybody kind of understands this. If we have a minimum of 17 subdivisions in this town that are going to cost a minimum of $392,000 to get them up to code to where they could be considered public property, that's $6.6 million, which is a considerable share of it's a lion's share of our budget as it is now. Even if we took on debt service to that, and, you're talking about public safety dollars that could be compromised to get these guys. And again, I'm not trying to diminish this problem, because it really is a problem, but looking out for what we were elected to do is council people, is to look out for the best benefit for the most people. And it's hard for me as a council person to vote for anything that could compromise the safety of our citizens, be it from police protection, fire protection, quality of roads that we have, to bring up a couple of neighborhoods. And again, I totally empathize with everybody that's affected by this, but it does draw, if you want to look at the big picture of things, the 30,000 foot view, this is not just an issue of let's be fair to these guys, which, everybody wants to be fair and as equitable as possible. But at the same time, we have to remember that we do have a limited budget, and even if you do take out bonds, we still have to pay those bonds back. So we have a very thin budget as it is right now, and if we have to pay those back, something's going to get compromised. This isn't Washington, D.C. The city of Ottumwa just can't print more money. Something has to give. If we do this project, then something else is going to go away. And that's not a threat. That's a very real promise. Something is going to go away in the city if we take on, at a minimum, $6.64 million worth of debt to bring these sewers up to par and to accept them in as city property.
The one thing that, to keep in mind, I was asked, if the city was to accept these, what would transpire, what needs to be done? That's bring it up to current standards. There are other options for the homeowners. I mean, first of all, John had a really good point. What is the condition of the line? That single blockage that caused the backup clear at the, I'm going to call it the southwest corner, could be one open joint with a root ball. The rest of it could be in relatively good shape. If it was bedded correctly, if it was jointed, correctly. Clay lasts almost indefinitely if you don't bust it from a physical impact point. It might be something that it could be just a lining job. If that's the case, you're probably in the $90,000 range.
Would you explain lining job who don't deal with it every day?
There is a product out which, the trade name could be in situ form. There's some other products that are the same. It's a fiberglass liner that's impregnated with resin, and then it's done through a reverse process. Anyway, it's stuck in, they clean it, evaluate it, mark all your laterals, active laterals, and then when they put it in, they cure it in place with steam. It's about 180 degrees to cure it. That's a very good system, and that's usually used if you've got a lot of open joints. It's still, the pipe needs to be structural sound. You might have to do spot repairs. We've done several of them programs in town ourselves on our system. We did the airport. We had roughly 9,000 feet. We did at the airport. We done 18,000 west of Quincy, and we're in the process through local funds and a grant. Hopefully we're going to get close to 18 or 20,000. I'd have to go back and look at the tab of what we're doing. So there's more options than just completely replacing it. Now, even if they did that, it would be.
Well, that's what I was just getting ready to say. Even if you use your low number of $90,000 at 17 of these subdivisions, you're still looking at $1.5 million that's going to have to come from somewhere.
But again, we can't use public money on a private system.
Understood.
Mr. Mayor, if I can, just to comment on that, and I appreciate you two clarifying that. And again, by state law, we cannot assume simply a private system that's not brought up to code. But that doesn't mean the city's not without expense. Because let's just take the assumption, you take those subdivisions then, and they are brought up to code. It would be like, I have a 20-year-old car in my driveway, and I just went out and bought a brand new car today. I'm glad I won't have to ever do any maintenance on that new car I just bought. Well, you're not. You're going to have maintenance costs, which again, and I think that's something, if council is comfortable with that, we can move forward on that. But the city does not wash its hands and we're going to have extra money then to maintain what will now become public sewers.
Okay, this has been a very good discussion, and I think education for both us, the council, and for the city residents and people who are at home watching. I think at this point, and
Someone else, I think, wants to.
was there one more? Step up, please, before we cut off the public input.
My name is Dennis Marching. I live at 2658 Clearview Street. I thought it might be good information to know that used to be alleyway years ago. There's actually utility poles running down in between the houses now. The city didn't maintain the alley, so the homeowners, took over that land, vacated. So now that it's vacated by the city and never maintained by the city, you say it's private and you can't get in there to it. But you approved the building of garages and stuff on that land that had permits. The city's allowed it to become private by neglect.
Can somebody respond to that?
When in the original subdivision, it was part of the plat process. It was a 10-foot wide utility easement. It wasn't right away for an alley.
There's utility poles running down it now being used.
Yeah.
But that's a utility.
That would have been done in the original plating.
It's a utility easement. It's not an alley.
But if was it ever vacated, or is it still an easement? Or does that make any difference on when they build on it?
It was an easement. We've never.
It still is then an easement?
I would have to check, but I don't see anything of vacating an easement.
I would guess it's still an easement.
It's got to be an easement. I mean, you've got
If
an
it's still
active
an
sewer,
easement,
you've got apparently overhead.
But if you have access to it to maintain your utility poles and things like that you can't get access to camera the sewer line?
Well, if you have an easement and somebody builds something on, is that something, I mean, like Weekend Warriors we talked about, I mean, do people build stuff on easements just like they just pop up and then we have to deal with it, or is that permissible or not? Is that something that people just do, or is it illegal, or is it legal, or what? I mean, easements are typically supposed to be kept clear, right?
The easements that we have control of, they would be. But again, that easement was established on what would be private property and sold to individual lot owners. But it was established for utilities. It wasn't established for a road.
Okay, a sewer is a utility.
But I might add, it's also not uncommon, though, with those easements to have people at times extend their property there until someone taps them on the shoulder and says, by the way, your shed is on a utility easement.
Exactly. And
And you can
again,
stay-
that was in the list, you'd have to look for easement encroachments.
Yeah,
We, on flood structures, we kind of maintain them and have more vigilance, but
Okay. Thank you for your comment, Dennis. Appreciate it. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Shirley Gingrich Sloniker. I live at 2610 Kenwood. And I have a sewer that runs on the back of my property to the east of the house. I have a sewer that runs on the south end of my house. And I don't know when, the house was bought in 2004. The city put in a storm drain. Who's responsible for that storm drain on my property? It was put in because my neighbors to the south, when it rained hard, we get all the water off of Clearview, comes down to Kenwood. And they complained because their water, the water that was coming off of Clearview, plus the water that we got when it rained, flooded their family room. So they went to the city, they put in this storm drain. I have one of those cement tabletop things to the south of my driveway on the street. I have one in the back corner. Now, who's responsible for that? Are you guys responsible for it because the city put it in? I also have a sewer that comes out of my house, which I've had a camera because I had a backup and put a backup valve in it. It comes out, makes a direct turn to the right, goes to the south sewer on my property. Am I responsible for the one on the back fence that I don't use? If there begins to be a problem back there?
we'd have to look. I haven't looked through that system. I'm not
But
sure.
you can follow up with her individually and do that.
Yeah, we can look and see what actually is a public system and where it lays.
Okay.
We'll-
But the-
we'll
the
guarantee
storm
we'll get
drain
that done.
and the sewer is both on my property.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Okay, I think at this point, we've had lots of input and comments and questions. Is there any other council business? I'd entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Councilmember Strebe?
Yes.
Councilmember Dalby?
Yes.
Councilmember Myers?
Yes.
Councilmember Rowe?
Yes.
Councilmember Stevens?
Yes.
6:57.
Thank you.